Welcome to the Small Giants Fishbowl. This topic is Culture Shock, getting your team on board with a culture revamp. Presented by Paul Spiegelman, CEO of the Small Giants community. Whether you're just starting to focus on culture, changing your strategy, or working to institutionalize your values, Paul will share his experiences and challenges in both small and large companies. Okay, here we go.
The topic today that I was asked to speak about was really about culture and culture buy-in, and how do we deal with challenges to the buy-in of culture over time. And I've had the advantage of, I guess, 30 years of experience, both in my own company and then in a large company, going through all those challenges. So I don't pretend to be a trainer or consultant or a professional, just a practitioner like you guys. And so I can share some of my experiences. And I know that I haven't met some of you before, so just by way of background and how we got to even form the Small Giants community is that I started my own business originally with my two brothers back in the mid-'80s in Los Angeles. And we were originally in the medical alert business, but then ended up being in the hospital outsourcing business. We provided services to hospitals to take calls from people in the community that were looking for doctors, essentially an outsourced physician referral service, and grew that to really be a patient experience company where we not only took calls from people looking for doctors, but it could be a mom signing up for a community education program. We could be making calls to schedule people for a mammography or making post-discharge phone calls, but all healthcare related, all in a call center environment, which, as you know, is not normally known for high morale or high margins, that kind of business. But we wanted to do something different. And so we built our business based on living a certain set of core values. And that culture, although we didn't ever design it that way, and I honestly didn't know any different, really became our stamp on the industry, so to speak. It became our calling card that we ultimately sold, not what we do as a business, but who we are. And I think that's an opportunity for every company as they're growing. So our company, Barrow Health, grew from its original roots in Los Angeles to when we moved it to Texas, to the Dallas area in the mid-'90s, first to operate a large center for a big healthcare company, then ended up buying it and moved our California operation here. So I'm talking to you from Texas today. Ultimately, I sold the business to a large public company, and that was back in 2012. The company was called TerraCycle. TerraCycle is a company I'd never heard of, and they were in the medical waste business. But I learned that many of these big public companies, at some point, they expand beyond their core, they diversify in order to grow, and they decided to get involved in the patient communication business. And then within a year, approached us, and we then became part of that family. And I realized pretty early on, after our company was acquired, that running the day-to-day operation of Barrow Health wasn't as exciting to me as after 28 years, and would be much more difficult to do in a large company environment. So the CEO of TerraCycle and I, sitting around one day chatting, he asked me what I really wanted to do. And I said, well, I want to be the chief culture officer of TerraCycle. I want to see if what we did in a small company could translate to a big company, whether we could scale and change a company culture of this size over time. TerraCycle today has 25,000 employees in 18 countries, does 40 to 50 acquisitions a year. So very different environment. And I don't know about you guys, but I've never even worked in a large company. So lots of lessons learned as I've gone through this experience. What brought me to the Small Giants was, like many of you, was the book. As I read the book when it came out 10 years ago, I had just finished writing my first book about culture, reached out to Bo, and he was kind enough to agree to write the foreword for my book. And we became friends. And over the next couple of years and over many conversations, I explained to Bo that there were many people that resonated with the messages in his book that could relate to that kind of values-driven leadership. And selfishly, I wanted to find a way to meet those people and to create more of a network and a community. And so that's how the Small Giants community originally got started. And it was the idea that we could identify values-driven leaders, we could then connect and then develop each other, because we're all just practitioners kind of learning as we go. And so while the community was developed probably originally in 2010, it's only really in the last year that we've almost kind of gone through a reinvention ourselves. So really proud to bring on Hamza and Ashton to the team. And what you guys are going to see over the next really 30, 45 days are some new exciting offerings from the community that we hope to get your feedback on, first of all, and that you'll want to take advantage of. So lots of change going on in the organization too. But to kind of get to our topic, since that's a little background on me, we talk about culture, and we all have stories of things that we've done, and many of you have wonderful cultures in your organizations. You might be just starting to create what you hope will be a more employee-focused culture. But over the years, I think what's become clear to me is yes, it's difficult to start, but boy, it's difficult to keep it going. It's difficult to keep it fresh and to make sure that as we go through bringing new people into the company, whether they're new leaders or managers or frontline team members, that they understand its importance, that they feel it just as the people felt it when we started this journey. So there's so many things, as I'll describe, that could bring a culture down or challenge it. But to me, as I think about my career, the one thing that's been critical to me is to be able to essentially leave a legacy which says that long after I was gone, that the culture of the organization remained, that it was sustained. And that's really difficult to do because we are so attached to our companies. And if you think forward to that day when that might happen, what are the chances that it will survive in the organization? And that went into my choice of whether or not to sell my company. Of course, the risk that when I did that, would the culture of my company survive and change within a much larger organization? And now, as part of a much bigger company, we're dealing with completely different issues, which are sometimes market forces that are outside of our control, or Wall Street analysts that have different expectations, strategic issues that could put the culture at risk. And I try to be honest with myself to say, okay, well, if our small team at TerraCycle left today, would the work that we've done to implement culture initiatives sustain over time? And so I think those are the things that I want to touch on today. What's clear to me is that in order for culture to be successful long term, and again, when I mean culture, I mean a successful, thriving, employee-focused culture. We all have a culture. It could be terrible, right? Could be great culture, but financially based. So everybody has a culture. I'm talking about employee engagement and its relationship to business metrics and overall financial goals over time and sustaining that. Clearly, we have to have buy-in at the top, right? So if you, those on this call, are the leader of your company, culture will only survive if you not only get it, but genuinely believe it, and not just delegate it to somebody else, but are willing to participate and walk the walk. And while we might have buy-in at the leadership level, and not just the CEO, but the senior leaders, we have to have participation from other parts of the organization. Of course, the frontline team members that are doing the work, anything that we're doing to help engage them, they're generally going to welcome and be a part of. But I have found over time that a big challenge we end up with is those middle managers, right? Those middle managers who are focused so much on just achieving a particular goal that they're not sure how they can add this to their job, because this is more work they're supposed to do. And we always say, well, we're not adding to your job. This is your job. And this is why this is important. Um, and then I think it's important to really get the front line involved. You know, if we think about both in my small company and at TerraCycle, the ideas for growing an employee-focused culture, they didn't come from me. They came from people that were doing the work, that were simply given the permission to be themselves, to come up with ideas that we could try to implement and then institutionalize across the organization. So for example, at Barrel Health, which grew to at its height maybe 380 people before we were acquired, we had something called the BBB, or the Better Barrel Bureau, and that was our culture committee. That culture committee grew from its start with one person, Lara, our queen of fun and laughter, who was essentially responsible for the culture, to developing a group of 4 or 5 people, and it grew to 70 people. Literally almost a quarter of our workforce that were involved somehow on this committee. And that then they developed senior leaders in those committees, that one that focused on reward and recognition, and another on our caring program, another one on our community service program, another one on events. So we divide and conquer. And believe it or not, at TerraCycle, we realized that we need the same sort of support. Just in the US alone, we have several hundred locations. So we have, to date, just in the US, 500 what we call culture ambassadors. And these are most of the time frontline team members who have raised their hand, love this stuff, and say, I want to be the local champion. I want to be the ear to the organization to bring ideas, to help you guys launch initiatives, to help sustain them, and make sure that wherever we sit in the organization, we're applying these initiatives consistently across the board. So all that to say that culture and its success and its sustainability is not your responsibility alone. Of course, you have to buy in and you have to support it and you have to talk about it. It's going to take a village, so to speak, in order for this to work over time. So when I think about culture, I think about really 3 things that I believe everybody wants. Any employee in any company, in any industry, whether you're the CEO or a frontline team member. And I use the acronym PAL, or P-A-L. First is purpose. Everybody wants to connect to the purpose of the company, or feel that there's a purpose that I'm here beyond the job. Number 2, we want to be appreciated. We want to feel like we're valued for the work that we do. And third, we want to learn. We want to feel like there's an opportunity to learn and grow. And I believe that as leaders and as those responsible for leading teams, if we focus our efforts on those 3 things and make sure people connect to our vision and values and understand their role, that they feel valued in the work that they do, that they feel that we care about them as an individual and are working to help them learn and grow, then we are doing a good job as leaders. And the rest of it, the goals, the metrics, the sales, the revenue, the profitability will come. So those are the things in many small ways that we've done in our small company over the years, and then have translated those same kind of programs into larger organizations to make sure that resonates with our team members. And it might be one thing to sit in a room and develop our core values, but we have to sort of ask ourselves, and I would ask you guys, if you think about each of these 3, and you were to sort of give yourself just a little mental score of 1 to 10 and how you were doing in that area. My question wouldn't be, do you have core values? Because most of yourselves say, yeah, we're a 10. My question would be, are these institutionalized in your company in the manner in which people live and work every day?
Paul, can you, I'm sorry to interrupt. Can you repeat those 3 once again? Because it sounds like they're real important. And I just want to write them down.
Yeah, I'm going to go through I'm kind of going through all 3, Jimmy. So first one is purpose. So that's kind of around the core values. Second one is appreciation. And the third one is learning. So PAL, P-A-L. So in talking about purpose, I'm really trying to have you guys gauge to what extent your core values are really lived day to day. And we realized that it wasn't the plaque on the wall, but it was how we hired people, We made sure that they lived to those core values and hired for fit. It's how we fired people, and realized that most of the time when we fire people, we don't fire them for performance. We fire because they don't fit. And so that's another way you live the core values. We talk about them in every meeting. We tell stories about how people have lived those core values. It's part of the way people are measured in their annual performance reviews. So there's actually skin in the game. It's talked about in our employee engagement surveys. So values are something that I used to be cynical about years ago, until I realized that they became almost spiritual in the way people lived and worked in the company. And it's kind of like building a house, and it's that foundation. If you don't have that, and that isn't something that people can go back to, especially in tough times, it's going to make it really difficult to have a sustainable culture. When we have a purpose for the company, which is, essentially how we make the world a better place, does everybody know in the company what that purpose is? Do they know what they do and how that aligns with the purpose, and what's in it for them if we achieve that target? So, purpose and values, I think, are really critical. The second one is appreciation, and that's where we're really talking about sharing with people that they're valued. And by that, a couple examples of the kinds of things that we have shown over time help do that. First and foremost is the relationship I have with my supervisor, right? Why do people leave companies? Because of that relationship. And you can do all the fancy recognition programs you want. But if I have a positive relationship with my supervisor who shows that they care about me, gives me good, honest feedback, and helps develop me, chances are I'm going to be engaged. Chances are I'm going to be loyal to that company. So small things like, do I have regular one-to-one meetings with folks? And when I hear people go, well, yeah, but I talk to them every day, that's not an excuse. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about that time set aside once a week or every 2 weeks just to say, how's it going? What's working well, what's not? How can I help you? Is to make sure that when we're having our annual reviews, if we do that, or we do them quarterly or every 6 months, that we're making them much less formal and much more of a conversation where we can talk about them and their goals. Because we just started talking about how we have a company vision and values, and we're trying to get people to live them and memorize them. Do you realize that everybody in your company has a personal vision that they may or may not have articulated? Why not ask them what their purpose is, what their values are, where they want to be in 5 or 10 years, and use that as the topic of your one-to-one meetings or your annual review, so that you can make sure that you're helping them along that path. And then the third, one other area of appreciation and recognition is, of course, more formal recognition programs. And one of the big learnings for me over the years was it wasn't about the money we spent. It was about simply showing gratitude to people. And everybody wants to be recognized in a different way, whether it's publicly or privately, whether it's a gift that they can receive, and there's all sorts of programs that you can put in place. We learned a really hard lesson at TerraCycle when we tried to implement a recognition program across the whole company, for example. And one of the things we found, and you guys may be familiar with these, is kind of an online recognition program. It was like an internal Facebook. So people could go online, all the employees were on there, they could recognize another team member for living up to the core values. They had badges and comments and all that, very cool stuff. And we loved it. And I went to the CEO and asked for budget to implement this across the whole company. Thankfully, looking back, he said, well, let's just test it in one of our businesses. So we implemented it for one of our businesses, and this was about 2,000 people. 6 months later, we determined that the pilot was a failure. And why was that? Well, we didn't know. We didn't know why it didn't work. I thought it was the coolest thing, and makes it so easy. We're in a company, a very blue-collar company, where half of our employees don't even have email. Believe that. Or so this was great because they could get to it from any browser, etc. The feedback we got was, we're not ready for an app. We're not ready for some technology way, what looks automated way of recognizing us. We just want our supervisor to say thank you. We want it to be much more personal. And we went back to the idea that if, they put a board up in one of the rooms with little Post-it notes to recognize one another in handwriting for living the core values, that was much more effective and a whole lot cheaper, right? So one of the key lessons learned over the years is don't assume you know how, when, why people want to be recognized. You got to ask. And sometimes it's not the highest tech way. And maybe a platform like that will work for this company in 5 years, but it doesn't work right now. The last one is learning and development. And in learning and development, of course, that's really showing our commitment to growing people's careers. And interestingly, again, when I got into TerraCycle, I felt really proud in our small company, where it's really hard to have formal training and learning programs, that we had developed kind of a philosophy and a way to implement that so people in our small company felt that they could grow. I moved to TerraCycle, this big public company, where there's growth constantly. When I started, they were 10,000 people. Now they're 25,000 in 3.5 years. So you can see this is a growth-focused company. So there's nothing but opportunity to grow. And yet I would go around to different locations, and one of the things I would hear was, there's no growth opportunity here. There's nowhere to go. And the reason that they felt that way is because no one exposed them to those opportunities. No one was talking about career advancement. There were no development plans in place. Just wasn't important, because they just kept adding on more companies and more people, and didn't really think about actually advancing people in the careers that were there in the company. And again, these things can be very formal or informal. I think it's important to commit to being a learning organization, and to commit those one-to-one conversations as with my supervisor, in part to my growth and development. If possible, to have a written development plan, so that I know where you want to be in 3 or 5 years, and we're working toward that. To be open to making sure that we're investing in that future, whether it's some additional training, whether it's some outside courses, whether it's an internal mentoring program. And again, I'm not giving you guys anything you haven't heard before, but it's these small things taken together that show our commitment to growing people's careers. And you want everyone in the company to feel like that there's opportunity to grow, and that you care about them and their willingness and eagerness to grow in the company. There are those rare people that love doing what they're doing, don't want to do anything else. God bless them. That's great. But most people really want to feel that opportunity. You have to make them aware of that. And with all the things, purpose, appreciation, learning, we have to get credit for this work that we're doing. In other words, people have to know that we're investing in the culture. People have to know the commitment that we're making. So there's a big internal branding and marketing component about that as well, that I think is that has to be said. So those are the basics of, I think, what we've done over the years. So let's talk about what gets in the way. What can get in the way of that culture continuing to grow, expand, or even exist in our company? One is changes in senior leadership. So it could be the CEO leaves and someone else comes in. And I don't know about you guys, but I've heard many of those stories where well, we used to have this great CEO, and then this new guy came in, and boy, it's all changed now. And so that's one of those things that happens. Or you might have a senior leader that came in, a new head of sales, or new, really important critical position, and that just didn't buy in. Happens all the time. And I mean, literally overnight, the culture of that organization can change. Outside forces, I think, are always things that can happen. What happens in the marketplace? So something that takes our eye off the ball as leaders. And that could happen in a small company. In a big company like TerraCycle, they have had that happen now in this last 1.5 years. Here was a company that for 15 years had never missed a projection on Wall Street. So they had hit or exceeded their numbers 70 quarters in a row. All of a sudden, 1.5 years ago, they missed their projection. The stock drops 20% in one day. Here we are sitting 18 months later. They've missed 3 out of 5 quarters. The stock has dropped 50% from where it was 18 months ago. They've lost $4.5 billion of market cap. I mean, can you even imagine that? I can't, and it's made me a little bit cynical about the public company world, to be honest, because it's a very profitable company and they have $1 billion of free cash flow. And yet they're in this position now where they have to scramble to make quarterly numbers. And is that a risk to the culture? Of course it is. The culture either is going to help us get through this, or the culture could easily go away. If the business priorities of the business lean toward driving revenue at all costs or other strategies, will it become less important to invest in culture? That's possible. Acquisitions, right? I don't know how many of you have either acquired other companies or been acquired. And again, I've been through it on both sides in my small company, and now have been a part of it where TerraCycle has bought many, I think 400 companies over the last 10 years. So we just acquired, did the largest acquisition of a company called Shredded. It was a $3.5 billion acquisition with 5,000 employees and a very different culture. And so we're going through all of those challenges right now. And what do they say brings down many acquisitions in M&A is cultures, competing cultures. So I can't say I have all the answers. We're just living through it right now. But I can tell you that when you put groups together that are used to doing things a different way, it's not an easy recipe to get through. Two others real quickly. One is a lack of process. So if we haven't institutionalized our values, institutionalized our culture processes, they are not going to survive. And most of you have a manual somewhere that talks about a lot of the things you do in your company. How you run operations, how you run sales. You've got all sorts of documentation for how you grow your business. Do you have one for culture? Do you have one that says that next new leader, that next new team member has this recipe that's documented and written down so it's going to survive? I'd say most of us would score ourselves pretty low in that area because you just feel, hey, this is all fun and good and we're going to keep doing this and it's going to survive. It's just not that simple. We have to document that. And lastly, it's the old cost-cutting initiatives. It says, okay, now we have to try to grow our margins in some way. And whether you're a small company, and I went through this in my small company where we needed to get more profitability, or you're a large company that's trying to hit a quarterly number, what are the things that go first? It's those small things that we tend to do for our team members that make them feel valued. Right? So travel freeze, nobody go anywhere. Training and development program for next month. Nope, sorry, we got to put that off. We can't do that right now. That recognition program that we had, got to put that on hold because we're trying to hit this number. And when you think about it, if we're honest with ourselves, the amount of money that we spend on these programs is so small. And the impact of what those mean to our team members is so big that it's very short-sighted to cut those out first. And what we try to do is to train our leaders to say, rather than cut those things out, if you included all those people in this whole process of understanding where it is we could save money, where we could help improve our margins, that's where the ideas are. They will help you get there. They will fall on a sword for you to help you get there. But don't take away those small things that are important to them. I remember when I first started at TerraCycle, I had managers in the field, and think about it, it's a medical waste facility and treatment plants and these, people that are just working incredibly hard and looked forward to that holiday party or the summer picnic that they would have. And then that stuff would get cut during these quarters when they needed to cut costs. And they would say, Paul, I can't even buy gift cards for my team. I can't have lunch during the holidays. I can't do any of that because corporate has said we got to cut costs. So I went back to the CEO and the CFO and I said, hey, did you guys realize when you said we had to cut costs that people were going to make those kinds of decisions and cut out those really small things? And they said, no, we never said don't have the picnic. We never said don't have lunch for the holidays. But what happens is that people get this message, this global message, and they take it upon themselves. It's kind of a black and white argument that says, hey, we just got to stop doing everything. And so they don't really use their heads to think about and use their judgment about what we cut or to involve other people in doing that. They just make these blanket decisions, and it really can be hurtful to people. So what do we do about that? In that case, we established culture budgets. And we basically came up with a formula that said, we're going to come up with a dollar amount per employee per year. And that money is going to be set aside in a account for each location. And that's never going to be touched no matter what happens with the company financially. If we have a tough quarter, doesn't matter. You know, and it was, I think we started off, it was like $100 per employee per year. You know, not a lot of money. And we could add to that over time. And the location could figure out, or the employees on the team could figure out how to use that money. And we tried to coach them. I don't blow it all on one event, you know, try to spread it out through the year. But it was a way to sort of protect that money and protect this philosophy and not worry about managers making decisions that are really not in the best interest of the company, and to make sure that these things survive. So as I look back on all of these tenets of building culture, to me, there's really no difference in a small or large company. The question is, how do we scale? And the challenges are still the same of how do they survive? And I'll kind of close out with just a couple of things that I think are important in order to make them survive. And then I'd love to open it up and hear from you guys. Of course, happy to answer questions, but more importantly, what challenges do you guys have? Or maybe we can sort of brainstorm here together that we could help answer around sustainability of culture amongst these challenges. First is that, again, the top has to support it. And we all have challenges, stresses, and you know, survival mode or whatever we're trying to do to grow our businesses. But if we are consistent in talking about how our values drive our business and support the culture initiatives in our business, whatever they are, it has a great chance of being successful over time. Two is consistency. And that means that no matter where we sit in the organization, we should feel this, right? It's if we have 5 people in our organization, maybe a little easier. As you get to 50 or 100 or 25,000, it gets different. Can I tell you today that every single team member at TerraCycle across the globe feels the culture the same way? No way, no way. But that's what we're working on. And we're working on that with 2,500 middle managers and 500 culture ambassadors and senior leaders to cascade these messages as much as we can. But the same applies to a small company. Wouldn't it be great if we were able to say that everybody in our company felt the same way about our culture and felt that they could connect to who we are as a business? Third is accountability. And that means that when it comes to being accountable for maintaining the culture and being good, values-driven leaders, this is where I get tough. And I don't believe that we can tolerate people that don't buy in and don't support it. And that's going to happen in our company. And it's happening in your company right now. It's happening in my company. The idea that there are people that don't get it, that they don't support it, they don't buy in. And while we need to have some tough conversations, ultimately we have to make tougher decisions. And we got to move on, and we got to get rid of them. And it's everybody else who's going to look at us and say, hey, what took you so long? When that happens, there's nothing like that one person that can bring it down. And it's just not worth it. It's not worth it to you, to them, who maybe they can thrive somewhere else. So values-driven leaders doesn't mean that we're tolerant of people that don't buy in. And lastly is just to go back to the beginning, which says that it is about leading a values-driven company. If you've established those core values, if those have been socialized, if they're lived every day, if people realize that when you're going through tough times and you're going through change, that's the one constant in the business, it can get you through just about anything. And that's what we're doing today at TerraCycle as an example, when we've seen the amount of stress on the organization, this unprecedented time where people feel insecure and have fear, whatever that is a result of, is to say, look, change is the normal, and we can't do anything about that. But what we can do something about is how we react, is how we do this together. And if you trust us that we're going to honor these core values, we're going to get through this together. So I've been blabbing for much longer than I like to talk. So let me kind of stop there, and Ash or Hamza, I don't know how you like to do this, but just open it up to questions or comments.
Yeah, so we're taking questions in the chat feature, but also if you just want to wave and, kind of share an anecdote or ask Paul a question or share a challenge, and we can kind of crowdsource that challenge, then you have the floor. Y'all are shy today. We see some new faces. Okay, Candace.
So my question revolves around, one of the challenges that we have is we do have a culture team here. Our culture team is called the Culture Navigators. And it's a group of obviously volunteers who have day-to-day regular jobs. And one of the challenges that we run into almost always is the time. Right, and getting the commitment of, having them find a time. One of the things that we've talked about is we'll add more people to the team. I just wonder if have you run into that challenge, and if you have, what do you do with that?
Yeah, I'm gonna, and Lara, if you're on the phone, I'm gonna let you answer that, but I'll tell a quick story. Is that when we first, at the big company, at TerraCycle, when we first got all these culture ambassadors, we had several hundred people, and we decided to have a conference call to introduce them all to each other and talk about our plan going forward. We got in big trouble from all of their managers who said, hey, you didn't ask permission to take this person from my team and put them on a phone call for an hour. And we said, oh, okay, we're going to have to go about this differently. But even at Barrel Health, as we grew our BBB or Better Barrel Bureau, of course, there had to be some discipline around the time necessary to allow those people to participate. Lara, are you on the call and want to chime in?
She's on, but we put her on. There she is.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, so this is one of the biggest challenges, especially in environments where you can't just pull people from their daily work schedule to meet. And what we started doing was we would alter when we would get together and meet, and we would alter when we would do different events or projects, and we would do things in the morning before shifts. We would do things in the evening after shifts. We would do things at lunchtime. And you're probably wondering, how do you get them to do that on their own time? And that was the biggest challenge. That what we did was we showed them what's in it for them. So once they really started to participate and do things, we highlighted them publicly. We started to recognize everybody who was volunteering, everybody who was putting in their own time. And the more that they did that, we showed them how much exposure they were getting, not just to leadership, but different departments and the businesses. Little by little, they all started to promote from within because of this activity, and it took off, and people didn't mind giving of their own time. They wanted to get out of it as much as they were getting into it. Didn't happen overnight, took a few months and lots of putting it out there. So if somebody, came and worked all day Saturday on something that was important to the company, we would make sure they got lots of very public attention about that from Paul or from Lance, who was our COO, and they were thrilled about that. And that just pumps them up and makes them want to do it more. So I would say find the what's in it for them, and then schedule things outside of the workday. We didn't always have things outside of the workday. If I could, every other quarter or something like that, we would do it during the work hours. But that worked out really well.
All right, we'll go Rachel and then Jimmy. Real quick, Rachel sent in a question that says, what do you think is the impact, good or bad, of internal culture on your customers?
That's a great question, Rachel. And of course, anybody else can chime in on that. I felt like there's obviously a direct connection between culture and engagement and what that meant for the customer. So there's really two sides to it. I think that I fully believe in what we call the circle of growth, that if we focused on our people and gain their engagement, that would drive customer loyalty, and that customer loyalty would drive profit into our business. However, beyond that, and I think that's, people would generally agree with that, the question is what can we do to have our customers participate and understand the culture and the value to them? So like I said earlier, to me, we got to the point where we were selling not what we do, but who we are. Any business that we're in could be commoditized in some way or another, and we could all compete based on cost. In the call center world, that was very typical, as you would, low cost provider wins. Well, we didn't want to do that. We wanted to be a value-based provider. We ended up charging 30 to 40% more than our next closest competitor. Well, how were we able to do that? It was to tell them that yes, we were a company that could answer the phone and be nice on the phone and give out referrals, but we were also growing the careers of our team members, that we exist to enhance the lives of the people that work here. And the benefit to the customer is going to be, they're going to just do a better job, and they're going to smile on the phone, and they're going to make that connection. And it was a great sales tool for us too, because we ended up really being a thought leader in the area of culture, and people would buy from us as much for the culture as they would for the services that we provided. And the same thing went for when we sold the company. I know that in great part why TerraCycle was interested in us was not just because we were the largest company in our small niche in healthcare, but that we had a very unique culture platform that they thought might extend into their business. But getting customers involved, we had tours every week, multiple tours where people would come and see what it was like to be in our building, and would walk away and just say, oh my gosh. I'd say 99 times out of 100, if we got them to visit, sold. We made that sale. Because they could really feel what it was like. So it's a wonderful way to differentiate yourself in the marketplace. So I think there's a tremendous connection to the customer.
Paul, I was going to ask a question. I love visiting Beryl TerraCycle at that time, but yeah, definitely the Beryl stamp was all over it. When you're talking about institutionalizing the culture, can you kind of describe that moment where the culture was kind of, it was a smaller group, it was intuitive, and that transition to actually make it more a formal, institutionalized piece, and kind of at what were the triggers like that you recognized in growing that said, hey, we can't just leave this to its own. We need to take care of and nurture this.
Yeah. Kevin, that's a great question. I think there were a couple times, I think for me, that we noticed that we needed to do something about this to sustain. One is that things would just stop happening that we used to do. And I'm a big believer in traditions, and that's what gains trust from your team members, that you're really serious about this when it's not flavor of the month. And if we do something that works, we do it again, and we do it again. If it's an annual event, we make it an annual event. We also stop things that don't work. The other thing that I think even more impacted the need to institutionalize or document and make a recipe out of this was when new people arrived, right? So when the company grows and you have new team members, and you finally realize that, this is all by making mistakes, you look back and going, God, that new group of people didn't go through the culture orientation like we did. They didn't get those books to read like the last group got, and they're not getting the same treatment. And then imagine, at TerraCycle, where we don't even know who all the new employees are, where they are, and how to get them materials. We're not part of HR, so we're not part of even that onboarding process. We might acquire a new company, and if that company had 5 people, how do we make sure that every one of those people gets this initial orientation to it? So if most companies over time grow, and again, if you look at any process you have in your business, I think if you're honest, you're going to say the only ones that survive are the ones that somehow we document and make sure that are put in place, and that there's a succession plan for those processes over time. Culture is sort of the last one to think about, because it's a feel-good thing in many cases, and sort of can be looked at as soft, or we don't need to do that because this is just who we are and how we feel, until you start to see it go away. And that's when you realize that there's something missing. And a lot of that comes from team members who anecdotally will say, it's just not like it used to be. Remember when we used to do this? Or you get that new group of team members and they're just not getting it the same way. So that's when I think it hit me that we needed to do more about that. And we're not perfect at it either. We got a long way to go. But I wish over time people would honor culture as a process, just like every other process in the business.
Okay, so one of the questions I had was, how do you stop from playing the telephone game? So, and especially in a larger organization, you got somebody at the top who's creating some ideas and such, and then they tell their managers, who then tell their mid-level managers, their lower managers, and by the time it actually gets to the frontline people, it's a completely different story. Now you've documented that, so that kind of helps a little bit. And then I have another follow-up question after that as well.
Good, because I can't remember 2 questions at once. The telephone game, I think, is a really interesting one. And what immediately came to mind, Jimmy, was that it is so difficult to ensure that the message stays the same. What I've tended to do, and this is just from what I learned over the years, is I sort of cut out the middleman or woman, right? In other words, I believe it's critically important for frontline to hear directly from the most senior leaders in the company. And that's something I've had to convince more than 10 leaders at TerraCycle, for example, who felt like their job was simply to delegate that task. Okay, I get it. I get we're supposed to do that. And all right, so I'm going to tell my team, my directors, big company, you guys go do this. And it always backfires. It just gets diluted, and the story's not the same. And then people wonder why the engagement scores on an annual survey are low, because there's no trust there. And so just today at TerraCycle, they'll send out organizational announcements of some big change, and it will be sent from an administrative assistant, that says, from the desk of so-and-so, whoever the leader is. It drives me nuts. I said, don't do that, right? Not to take anything away from the administrative assistant, but we want to hear from the person directly. It's real easy to put a name and a face. I remember finally taking one of the senior leaders at TerraCycle to do some listening sessions with frontline team members. And that's what finally convinced her. Because what she realized is she wasn't at all in touch with what was going on. So not only were messages not getting down from things that maybe she was trying to do, but what was really happening on the front line never got to her. And so my lesson and the moral of the story was, you have to get connected directly. That's where you're going to earn trust. And that's where you're going to find out what's really going on. Because she's a woman of action and got things done right away. She just didn't know about it. And it kind of goes both ways. And there's others may have a better answer to your question about how to cascade. I have found to the direct approach to be the best.
So my follow-up question is, so people have been with your organizations for 20 years, other people have been with them for 20 weeks. And so there's a certain amount of knowledge creep or you don't get. So for instance, at our company, OptiFuse, we do a book of the month. So everyone's responsible for reading we read a chapter a week, and then we discuss it in our meetings. Well, the book we've read 3 years ago, people will bring that up, and the new employees have no idea what we're talking about. Now I can hand them a stack of 15 books when they first are employed, but they just don't if I'm talking about a Small Giants, which was one of the books we've actually read, but If I'm talking about a principle in that, or good to great principle or something to that effect about hedgehogs, and newer employees have no idea what I'm talking about, nor other people, but where older people do know what we're talking about. So we either have to stop and kind of get them up to speed, or hand them, like I said, a whole bunch of books and such, the way we did things, and how we do things and such. So how do you try to, especially in an organization that's been around as long as TerraCycle?
Yeah, I think that the good news is that an organization like TerraCycle wasn't doing any of this kind of stuff at all. So it was kind of a blank slate, which meant that anything we did was good and positive and a change. To your question, I think I remember the days at Barrow Health when the new employee would come and there was a stack of 2 books, then 4 books, then 6 books, right? And then we even put in something where they had to write a book report, and I would get to look at them, and I was getting less and less of them over time. I mean, it just became too difficult. But if you think about it, each one of those books, or each one of the lessons, or things that you want them to teach, can be compartmentalized in a way and say, okay, what is the big lesson that if it's the hedgehog concept, or good to great, or it's something about employee focused culture that you learned in a different book. If we could try to put those in a format that can be utilized and scaled as we grow, then I think it's possible to keep those kind of philosophies alive. I think my bigger challenge in a large company was more around leadership style overall. The idea of having a book club or talking about these concepts would be so foreign to these leaders who were, as we all use this term, command and control leaders in corporate America, that grew up and had great success. And honestly, I went and said, I thought they were all jerks until I got to know them a little bit and realized that, they're really not jerks. They have hearts like the rest of us. They just don't know any better. And what they did in their style, which is directive and command and control, and this is how you do it, and not worrying about people or any of that, it worked. And got them those 10 promotions. And yet the world is changing, I believe. I think you guys do too. And the methods of leadership are changed. So one of my personal challenges has been working with these senior leaders to see if leaders can change the way they lead, and they can use the concepts that you and I have learned by reading or dealing with our peers, and make those part of their day-to-day life, and then see the impact of that. And I've been really pleased that while it takes some time, and most of them are style things, that they realize that it's not just about making money, it's about having the impact on other people as well.
I was going to ask more questions. I can always ask more questions because I have a whole list of them here. So what do you find there's going to be, especially any organization, there's going to be people who either A, disagree with some of the culture, not all of it, but some of it, or B, they just don't participate. One of the things we celebrate birthdays here, and that's a big thing. We've always done this, and we have a party and we have cake and such as we're growing, which now about every 3 weeks we seem to have a party. But there's some people who say, look at either because of religious beliefs or other things, I'm not going to participate in these parties. I'm not going to participate in the picnic. I'm not going to participate in certain things. Now, they do their job and they do them really well. So performance is not an issue. It's whether or not they're buying into the culture. And so you don't want to let go someone who performs like a superstar person just because they don't buy into the culture.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that what we found over time is while you'd like everybody to participate and buy in, that's not going to happen with everyone. And we say that that's completely okay, that you don't have to participate in it. And you don't have to do anything you're uncomfortable with. You don't have to dress up on dress up day. But you do have to be supportive of the kind of culture that we have. You can't badmouth it. You can't be a negative influencer. You can't talk about the fact that you don't believe it to your peers in a way that's going to be a negative influence on others. So that we wouldn't tolerate, no matter how good of a performer they were.
Yeah, I'd like to chime in on that one too, because I worked with Paul at both Barrow Health and TerraCycle, and something we saw was maybe we couldn't give somebody a cookie cutter initiative that they were going to enjoy or participate in. But what we always found is if they voiced it, or if we opened dialogue with, those individuals and said, you have the autonomy to start whatever you want, as long as it's within means and it's scalable. And so people that we talked to just said, hey, I'd love to do something cool around here. I just didn't know I was allowed to. And we're like, well, bring your idea to the table. That ended up starting Motorcycle Club, Zombies versus Ninja Day or something or other, dress up day. They're like, I don't want to wear my pajamas, but I definitely want to dress like a zombie. And then like our IT group, super analytical, super to themselves. And then we said, hey, build your IT department culture. And then they started dress up like Nerd Day to make fun of themselves. They bought a ping pong table on Craigslist and stuff like that. So just, telling the employees, like, you have the autonomy to make the culture what you want, and then attitudes flip like that.
I think it's also important to recognize across the company what culture is and is not. And this is something we had to deal with at TerraCycle, because the initial impressions were, first of all, like, Paul, what are you doing here? We're doing great. We've had all this tremendous growth and financial success. We don't need this. To then having people feel like that culture was just the party or the event and the fun times we would do together. And we had to educate people that that's not what culture's about. If you think about the three things I mentioned, purpose, appreciation, and learning, I didn't talk about dress up day. Of course, we're simply allowing people to be themselves, but it's important that people are also clear what we mean by culture in our company, and everybody can have their own definition.
Okay, well that's it for this one. Check out more Fishbowls exclusively for the Small Giants community at smallgiants.org.